I aim to answer a question we have all been wondering. How do fish hold their breath underwater for so long? So it turns out that fish have these things called gills, which allows them to... Yeah, you guys are right, we'll save that one for a different video. So instead, let's find out if you can beat Castle Crash's Insane mode whilst only using the worst magic in the game. That's because the King Splash magic is the only magic in the game that heals instead of doing damage. This is normally great during regular playthroughs, as you can heal yourself whilst using your melee and other damage sources. But with magic being our only damage for this challenge run, not having a splash magic is gonna be a problem. That means we have to rely on our other 3 magic attacks in order to complete this challenge. That being our magic projectile, which shoots a non-elemental banana, air projectile, which also shoots bananas, and finally our magic jump, which gasses the enemies? Now at a first glance, this doesn't seem all that bad, until you realise that we are limited to hitting one enemy at a time. Well, I guess our magic jump can hit multiple enemies, but I'm gonna have to get pretty close for that one. Anyway, that's an issue for future me to worry about, as my current objective is stopping these pesky barbarians from stealing the kingdom's princesses.
Help me! Help me! Help! Help!
Help me! Help! Alright, new plan. Let's go save the kingdom's princesses. So I set off into barbarian war, sharing my banana with all of the enemies. Wait, this led me onto the war machine, which is our first boss of the run, and with our bananas doing 71 damage per hit, the war machine was swiftly defeated. This brought me onto the barbarian boss, who stood no chance against my bananas. With slow and predictable attacks, the barbarian boss was easy to avoid as well as do damage to, so after dropping the big fella, I grabbed my loot and then tried to save the princess. Well, this is awkward. I kinda forgot to bring my scissors. But hey, I'll come back for you, Red Princess. I promise, I'll be right back. You just hold there, I'll be back, don't worry. Next was Forest Entrance, where I had a little bit of trouble with the thieves here. So when I cast my projectile magic, there is a short animation where I am completely vulnerable. That meant I had to spend most of my time in the air, spamming my air projectile magic whilst trying to not get caught in any arrows. So after defeating all the thieves, I moved into the next level, which is called Thieves Forest. Yeah, so I had the same issue here and just repeated the same strat. So I continued through Thieves Forest, where my bananas were now doing 72 damage, which is one more than my previous 71 damage bananas. This happens because every 10 levels you gain, you will get 1 extra DPS. This happens a total of 9 times, since you get capped at level 99. Behemoth, please just make it 100. But on top of the DPS boost, you also get a health increase with every 1 level you gain. The next boss was the Troll Mother, which was the first difficult fight of this run. And that's due to the Troll Mother kinda being the direct counter to this magic only challenge. I can try using my projectile magic, but there's a million trolls in front of the Troll Mother. Perhaps use my magic jump to get out of the way, except I land into a swarm of trolls. Maybe use my air projectile to hit the Troll Mother? No, she runs away after taking damage. So to no one's surprise, I took my first death of the run here. But after dying, I went and changed my animal orb for Rami, who has saved me in countless challenges in the past. That's because Rami's ability allows him to knock over enemies. This can be done by walking into an enemy with Rami, or when Rami charges. This should allow me to safely magic jump, as Rami will prevent any enemies hitting me when I land. But before I went back to the Troll Mother, I went and changed my weapon to the glow stick. This will give me a +5 to my magic as well as my defense, whereas the unicorn horn gave me +6 magic and a +1 defense. Now I know this is less damage, but +4 defense for -1 damage is a no-brainer for me. So with my new weapon and animal orb, I fought through Thieves Forest and made it back to the Troll Mother. For my second attempt, I immediately opened the fight by spamming my projectile magic. trying to get as much damage as possible before the trolls spawned in. From there, I used my magic jump to gain some height and spam my air projectile magic. I repeated this until the troll mother got to a third of her health, where she then began running anytime she took damage. So for this phase of the fight, I decided to only do damage by using my jump magic. And this strat did work, although I still had some pretty close calls. But after defeating the troll mother, I ran through the abandoned mill and spent all of the river rapids getting chomped on by bats. This led me onto the catfish, which is a slow but easy boss fight. Simply throw bananas during the damage phase and block in between. So I moved on to tall grass fields and proceeded to teabag the bear boss to death. Yeah, so the bear boss is really agile and loves to stay in his tornado, meaning my best source of damage was the magic jump, since I could just go over there and fart on it. And after beating the bear boss, I defeated all the remaining bears and moved into PP Strello's cave. And... oh, what's this? PP Strello dinner time? Oh, I completely forgot! Hold on, PP, I'm coming. Alright PP, on today's menu we have bananas. Locally sourced, hand-picked, and perfectly ripe. Just don't eat too many though, as I heard bananas can make you quite gassy. Well, who would like to help me clean this mess up?
Nope.
Not me.
I have a thing. Right lads, it looks like it's just you guys and me. Phew, that was a messy job, but I'm glad we all came out unscathed. Next was Flowery Fields, which is one of my most dreaded levels in any challenge run I do. And that's due to this unique wall section, which is not found anywhere else in the game. So after beating the Flowery Field part of Flowery Fields, you get catapulted onto the cathedral walls, where your vertical movement is limited to basically nothing. Now this isn't ideal for our current challenge run, as I am limited to hitting one enemy at a time. But where things go from not ideal to downright horrendous is when the game decides to spawn in a swarm of coneheads who all throw bombs. And if you think these Grey Knights will be any help, then no. No, they're not. So to no one's surprise, I took another death here. And another, and another. So who would have guessed that having a magic that only hits one enemy at a time, combined with no vertical movement and bombs, would result in the worst time of my life? Anyway, the strat I decided to go with was standing in the corner and spamming my bananas. This will help keep the enemies away whilst also getting in some hits. But the real bulk of damage came from the enemy bombs, which could damage the other coneheads. So my plan was simple. 1. Sit in the corner. 2. Spam my bananas. And 3. Die. And after 3 hours of attempts with different weapons and Iron Orb combinations, I knew what to do. And it's something I'm kind of good at. And that's doing the same thing over and over again for up to 20 hours in the hope I get a different result. Yeah, so I honestly wish I could say I figured it out, or we found the magic combo. But no. I just kept throwing myself at the level, hoping to get some good RNG. And after 3 hours of attempts, it finally happened. So on the first wave of enemies, I did what I was good at, cowering in the corner looking like a lost child. Here I spam my magic to keep the enemies away whilst also having to dodge their bombs. But I eventually defeated the first wave and used this time to heal my health using the King Splash magic. I then repeated this for the second wave before moving on to the third and final one. Now this wave of enemies consists of 3 coneheads and a beefy, but for some strange reason, the beefy doesn't attack as long as the 3 coneheads are alive. This allowed me to get a bunch of free damage on the beefy without having to worry about being yeeted. And by the time I defeated one conehead, the beefy was already low and also died shortly after, allowing me to finish off the remaining coneheads and finally move into Wedding Crash. Now Wedding Crash consists of coneheads and their bombs, but I no longer had any restriction to my vertical movement, allowing me to take out all of my frustrations and make it to the conehead groom, who certainly was a boss. But speaking of bosses, the giant troll was next, who was also no match for my banana, as all I had to do was keep smacking him in the face.
Hey!
Next was Cyclops Cave, which I was able to breeze through, then Cyclops Bridge, which took me a couple of hours, and finally the Cyclops boss fight, which was kind of intense. Yeah, this fight was just a drawn out staring contest. But after beating the Cyclops, I made my way over to Lava World, or what I like to call it, British Summertime. I then defeated all of the locals, punched this weird looking rock, and made it to the dragon boss fight, where this happened. Oh. 7:30? Yeah, so fire demons can spawn in with the Black Morning Star, which has a 4% crit chance. This meant there was some RNG in this fight, as I wanted fire demons that didn't have this weapon. But going back to the boss fight, and this just sucked. So during my bow only challenge run, I would normally stand up on the slope, spamming my arrows and doing damage to the dragon. But for whatever reason, doing this same strat with projectile magic just wasn't really hitting. And when it rarely did, the fire demon would come up the slope with me, eating any bananas I threw. So what I ended up doing was using my magic jump to gain some height, before spamming my air projectile and getting as much damage as I possibly could, whilst also having to dodge the dragon's fire breath, the fire demon in general, and this ginormous boulder, because why not? Let's just get some more things in there. This resulted in a very stressful, drawn out boss fight, especially when I used my last health potion when the dragon was only half health. But with a lot of dedication and the guarantee of losing my hair by 30, the dragon boss was defeated and I could move on to the industrial castle. Now I was worried about this level, as the enemies pack a punch and there's quite a lot of them in a small area. And when my first attempt resulted in a double magic jump death, I was not too hopeful. But things got worse on my next attempt, as I died whilst taking a bomb to the face. Oh yeah, did I mention all of these guys throw bombs? Because they do. A lot. But after taking many deaths with different animal orbs and combinations, I finally locked in with Bipolar Bear and made it to the elevator. Now this is the part that I was dreading, as I've got to deal with like 1 million coneheads. Coneheads? Oh god, the trauma. I've got to deal with many fencers who all throw bombs and do insane amount of damage. So for this, I decided to only use Magic Jump, as it would work both as my offense and defense. Cause you know, being on the ground is like certain death. But another reason why I didn't use any other magic was to reserve my magic bar, as spamming air projectiles would deplete my bar, leaving me vulnerable and most likely dead. But after jumping around more than the average trampoline park, I defeated all of the fencers on my first try and progressed onto the beefy brute, who actually wasn't difficult at all. Being able to run around an open space and spam my magic meant that the beefy brute was just not an issue. This also extended onto the industrial machine, as the only real threat in this fight are the giant mechanical fingers, which can be kept away with like a couple banana throws. So after defeating the industrial machine with little to no sweat, I let my chat decide on the fate of the industrial prince. Shay, thank you so much for the £5 donation. GG, Yeah, I guess Bipolar Bear must hate the industrial prince. But speaking of hating things, after crossing the ocean or lake... Wait, no, seriously, what is this? Like, does anyone even know? I landed in the desert. Now, this is my least favourite level in all of Castle Crashers, but in all honesty, the desert isn't too bad when it comes to ranged challenge runs. I mean, I did first try it during my bow only insane mode, so it wasn't too surprising when I also first tried it during this challenge run, although I definitely didn't enjoy it. Next was the alien ship, which was easy but still annoying. There are many aliens I have to defeat, but they are a one-shot, meaning I could slowly take them out one by one. So after crashing the alien ship, I fought my way through the last stretch of desert and entered the sandcastle. Now this level can actually be quite hard for a ranged challenge run, since you have to fight 2 beefies as well as a bunch of regular enemies. But by using the secret tunnel, I could separate one of the beefies behind this wall, making this fight a whole lot easier. And after defeating the first wave of enemies, I went and lured the beefy back out and swiftly defeated him too. This allowed me to move to the sandcastle roof, where I now had to deal with enemies that spam their magic, which is pretty cringe. But these Saracens were a bit of an issue, since they move around the screen a lot, making it easy to get hit if I'm not locked in. But their tornadoes can be blocked with the shield, which definitely came in handy. And after dodging an insane amount of arrows, I finally made it to the volleyball game, where I had a bit of a problem. So for whatever reason, this volleyball cannot be moved with the king's magic. This meant I was forced to melee the volleyball, but since I'm not damaging any enemies with my melee, the run is still valid. With the volleyball game won, I collected the map and moved on to the marsh. Now the marsh has been a big roadblock in my previous runs, since it has a Troll Mother mini-boss, enemies that do insane damage, and easily one of the worst and hardest wave of enemies in any challenge run. That of course being the 8 skeletons, where 4 of them are beefy. Yeah, so this wave just straight up sucks. The area is small and enemy dense, the 4 beefies can use the force and grab you out the sky, and the smaller skeletons are fast and use their magic. So after taking a death, I was left with no choice. I had to bring the Rami back out. And with the help of Rami, this wave was actually not too bad. I simply ran to each side of the level, allowing Rami to knock over any enemies in the way. This would end up buying me valuable time to spam my projectile magic. And so with the hardest part of Marsh over with, we could move on and hopefully have no more trouble. 450 damage? Oh no. Yeah, so the rest of Marsh is primarily snakies who do an insane amount of damage. And that's not even mentioning the Troll Mother mini-boss. But going back to the snakies, and these guys were a real issue for this challenge run, as they like to close any distance and try to melee. But at the same time, if I get too close to them, they like to magic jump. This resulted in some pretty awkward fights, as I spent most of the time running away and only getting a few bananas out. But moving on to the Troll Mother mini-boss, and this is the exact same as the OG Troll Mother, but with less health and extra snakies. This meant I wanted to focus all of my damage on the Troll Mother herself, as she was a lot easier to take down and would not spawn any more trolls. So with the help from Rami, I was able to defeat the Troll Mother and finish off the rest of the enemies. Next was the Corn Boss, which is the Corn Boss. Yeah, there's not much to say about this fight, except I did use the peasants to make it go by a little faster. And after visiting the best store in the game, I moved into Medusa's lair, where I had another issue. That being the combination of the annoying fishmen and heavy-hitting snakies. I feel like Medusa's temple is really overlooked in terms of difficulty, as in my opinion, it's definitely one of the harder levels in the game. Fishmen are a slightly more tolerable version of the scarab, and snakies, well, they just do a lot of damage. This makes Medusa's temple a awkward level, as if I focus on the fishmen, the snakies can do a lot of damage. But if I focus on the snakies, the fishmen will track me aggressively and get an almost guaranteed hit. It also doesn't help that Medusa's temple is quite a buggy level. What is going... Where am I? Game? Game? What is Game? But after taking a few deaths, including this one where I died to this little patch of water, I defeated all of the enemies and made it onto Medusa. Now this boss fight is an endurance one, as she's not really difficult, but instead has a lot of health. And by the end of the fight, it kind of felt like my banana versus her snake. But after making Medusa and her snake hard, I moved on to Full Moon, which was the true endurance test. But starting from the beginning, and this wasn't too bad since I could stand in a spot that made the beefies unable to hit me. So I repeated this for all 3 waves before moving on to the final part of Full Moon, which has a whole lot of stove faces. And fun fact, did you know that dying on Full Moon will actually reduce how many stove faces you have to fight in this section? Because I didn't and had to fight 5 more stove faces. But it's okay because I had a trick up my sleeve. That of course being Magic Ladder Strats. So unlike regular ladder strat, Magic Ladder Strat utilizes, well, magic. This is done by climbing on the ladder and luring all of the enemies to my position. I would then use my magic jump, dealing damage to all the enemies as well as getting me above the ladder. But 30 minutes later, I was able to defeat all of the enemies and move on to Snow World. Now this level is quite deceitful, as when meleeing, it's a really easy level. But when doing a non-melee challenge run, this level can actually be quite rough. Since Eskimos have some of the highest health in all of the game, plus you have to constantly be avoiding these snowballs whilst also fighting Eskimos on the ground. This results in a stressful, drawn out level, and even though I beat it on my first time, it still took me over an hour to do. But speaking of drawn out fights, and next was the Frost King, which is one of the worst fights in the whole game. You basically just spend 30 minutes slipping on ice whilst the Frost King teleports around and laughs at you. And this is the boss that the Behemoth decided to give 50,000 health to. But this won't be a problem going forward since he is getting a health reduction in the Painter Boss DLC. You know, just 16 years later. But after defeating the Frost King, I made my way through Wizard Castle Interior and made it to the Painter Boss fight. Now the Painter wasn't too bad for my current build, as I could just sit back and spam my magic, destroying any of his paintings and doing damage in between. But on my first run, I ended up getting sandwiched and hit with this nasty combo. Things went a lot better on my next attempt since I was able to get the Painter to his second phase. Here I stood as close to the Painter as possible so my bananas wouldn't hit any of his paintings. And after a lot of dodging and magic spam, the Painter was defeated and restocked all of my health potions. Next was the Undead Cyclops, where I spent half of the fight throwing out magic and the other half PP ground stratted. Repeat for enough waves and the Undead Cyclops was defeated. This brought me on to the next boss, which is easily the hardest fight in this whole challenge run.
The Necromancer.
This guy is notorious for being the hardest boss fight in all of Castle Crashers, and for good reason too. The fight starts out with a dense wave of enemies, consisting of all types that you fought throughout the game. This makes the fight really awkward, as there's not one playstyle that you can rely on, which resulted in me just running around and spamming whatever magic I could. But on my first attempt, disaster struck when I accidentally meleeed one of the enemies, causing me to exit to the map. But things went a lot better on my next attempt, as I was able to beat the first wave of enemies and move on to the second, where we now have to face a mixture of even more difficult enemies and 3 beefies. Yeah, so this is the wave of enemies that gives the Necromancer his reputation. During the first wave, I could just stay in the air and spam my air projectile magic. This allowed me to do constant damage whilst also staying safe. But during the second phase, I couldn't really do this, resulting in a death. Then another, then about 20 more. Yeah, so I had about 5 hours worth of attempts on the Necromancer alone. And each run would always result in me dying on the second wave. And what made this even more worse is the fact that whenever I ended my stream for the night, I would have to fight the Painter and Undead Cyclops just to get back to the Necromancer. So instead of boring you with 5 hours of attempts, let's just go over my winning run. So as normal, the first wave wasn't an issue. I just spammed my magic jump and air projectile attacks to stay away from the enemies. And 10 minutes later, I moved on to the second wave and made sure to have Rami with me. This was because a large portion of my damage was being done by the beefies. But by having Rami, he could occasionally knock me out of the beefie's grasp. And this proved useful, as on this attempt, Rami saved me twice at the very start. But focusing on the enemies, and the first one I wanted to take out was the alien. since he had the least amount of health and also spammed his gun, which would often knock me down. And after defeating the alien, I focused all of my attention on the beefy bear, as his hitbox was bigger than the regular enemies, making it a much bigger chance for my knives to hit him. Plus, reducing the amount of beefies was essential, as it would give me more airtime and therefore less damage. And after beating the beefy bear, I then repeated the same strat for the beefy barbarian. This resulted in there being only one beefy, significantly decreasing my chances of being grabbed. I then spent the next few minutes running around the arena, making sure to stay in the air for as much as I can, as this had two purposes. One being to stay out of damage and also spam my air projectile attacks, but also to allow the enemies to throw bombs, as they did a large chunk of damage to any enemies that were hit. And as the minutes passed, the enemy population began to reduce, leaving me with the beefy and only a few of the tankier enemies. This allowed me to slow down a bit and not have to panic as much, focusing my damage to one enemy at a time and further reducing their numbers. This left me with just the beefy and the conehead, where I was able to run to one side of the arena and spam my projectile magics, killing the conehead and finally the beefy. Oh, we did it! We did it, dude! The final enemy was the Necromancer, who is a bit of a pushover. Yeah, after defeating that second wave, you can just spam your magic on the Necromancer and he literally can't do anything. And after beating the Necromancer, I only had one last boss before I beat this challenge. So for the first wave of the Evil Wizard, I had to destroy 4 of these crystals. A very simple but tedious task to do. But speaking of tedious, the second wave of the Evil Wizard consists of 2 different bubbles. One that resists magic damage and one that resists physical. But for whatever reason, the magic jump can damage both of the bubbles. So I spent the next 5 minutes just jumping next to him. For the next 3 phases, I used my magic jump to gain some height and spam my air projectile magic, leaving me with the final phase, where all I had to do was just avoid these meteor attacks. And after feeding the Evil Wizard enough bananas, he finally imploded, officially ending this challenge run. And finally, the girls extract oxygen from the water through a counter-current exchange system, making it so fish can breathe underwater. Don't forget to like and subscribe for 5 cool fish facts, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.